Hey everyone, it's Ben Cecchini, founder of Give and Grow, back with another episode of the Give and Grow podcast. This is our social emotional learning series. Today I'm super excited to introduce to you Maike Hirst. Maike's a social emotional learning specialist out in Colorado, a mental health champion, social worker, and mom of one, bonus mom of two. So Maike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be doing this. Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. So for those of you new to the podcast and to this specific series, here we're going to be talking with a social emotional learning specialist just so we can continue to help raise healthy, loving human beings. And this is a big component of what we do with Give and Grow on the social emotional learning piece. So we're really excited to have somebody who's passionate, who's knowledgeable, and a specialist in the area. So just right off the bat, Micah, like, can you explain a little bit just like what is social emotional learning for people that might be unfamiliar and like why it's so important?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the cool thing about social emotional learning is that it's kind of a catch-all. So what I like to say to students that I work with, because I'm in an elementary school in my current position, is that we learn all about how to read and write, and we learn all about math and science and things like that. But the cool part about what I get to teach is that it's all about understanding your head and your heart.
Mm,
So, social emotional learning is really anything that helps you, make decisions, manage your emotions, have your own identity, have friends, work with people. So it's kind of neat that it can be so many things. But I think it's really neat because it's also for everyone. So it's not just for kids, it's
mhm.
for adults too.
Right. Heck yeah. Heck yeah. So like as you're explaining that, like I constantly point when I'm working with kids to hear mental
Hmm.
and emotional skills is what I usually do. I'm always pointing at the
Hmm.
heart. So I appreciate that you're shouting that out here too.
Yeah.
Um, real quick, just like a pop quiz question right off of that. With the heart, what's like one of the main things you like to share with a kid when it comes to like introducing the heart or working on like a skill associated with the heart?
I love that. That's really interesting. I think it's funny because littler kids don't know how to label feelings. So when you give them a feelings wheel or a chart like the one that's kind of behind me, suddenly they're able to put the word to it so much better. But sometimes
Mhm.
it's just as simple as like, what's my expression? And we just work on that first. And I
There we
think
go.
that really helps with heart. So it becomes this whole process of, okay, well, we feel like our friend is being mean to us, but what are the facts here? So like, okay, we feel
Mhm.
upset. What are we thinking about that? And what are we feeling about that? And
Mhm.
unraveling all of that is super interesting. And as adults, we even get really confused with that kind of language. We forget to label that a feeling is a feeling, and facts can sometimes not lead us to the same conclusion.
100%. I appreciate just that, like calling out those two different spaces because it can be hard to navigate those, especially in stressful situations. And there's been a
Mhm.
bunch I've read on like nonviolent or compassionate communication. And you talk about like, okay, what are the facts? What are the feelings as you're, discussing this with another adult or with a kid even. So I'm just like already excited about this conversation. So, like, speaking of facts, like, what's a fact or a stat that you've heard or a personal experience that you've had, maybe, like, that helps to demonstrate more so why social emotional learning, these mind and heart skills are so important for young kids?
Gosh, well, I could talk about that all day. So that the hard part is going to be limiting me here, but I think the really cool part is, and why my position exists, is because it's been demonstrated that students can't access the academia, they can't access academics and learning without that social emotional component. So when we
Mm,
learn social emotional skills, it actually gives us the ability to then concentrate better and have the skills available to do other learning that is totally not even correlated or involved.
right.
Um,
Love that.
yeah, it's
So
so
like
weird, right?
so like what's coming to mind for me is like if a kid is in like fight or flight and they're having to take like a math test, it's going to be way harder for them to like recall what they learned in preparation and like perform well on the test.
Yes, totally. That's a really great example. Yeah. And you will see that, especially with like second graders in particular. Suddenly, this is the year where academics are getting really challenging. First in kindergarten, oftentimes kids are just learning how to read and how to write, what handwriting skills look like. And suddenly, we're doing test taking, we're
Hmm.
challenging those math facts. And yes, all those kids often get that like test anxiety. And that's a really
Mm.
great example of how social emotional skills, like a self-regulation technique to help you calm down and get focused on the task at hand, can help you perform better. But sometimes
Hmm.
it's even more broad than that too, which is kind of neat. Like
Okay.
if you're doing a group project, even in middle or high school, you need to be able to know how to compromise and work together. And if you don't have those kind of skills built up, then you can't do those things.
Okay, okay. I got like so many follow-ups for you on this piece because I think the first thing that stood out to me was when you're talking about second graders and that being like a main point in time where they're kind of needing some skills to be able to perform under these stressful situations and getting a little more complicated with their schoolwork and those sorts of things. Like you mentioned like emotional regulation technique. What would be something that you would introduce to a second grader as they're kind of learning to navigate this newness?
That's great. I love the power of deep breaths, but I think that we rely on it too much, and kids don't always know what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really great to give a visual with it. And we were talking about the motioning before, and I think with
Mm-hmm.
littler kids, that really helps. So sometimes we'll do an exercise that just uses your hand because you always have your hand with you.
Uh-huh.
So sometimes that can look like tapping. So we tap, and that way we can count down. And sometimes just
Okay.
counting down and focusing on something else can really get us out of our heads so that we can focus on just like the sensation, or we can breathe
Mm-hmm.
with it. So it's like a,
Okay.
and then I'm going to do it again, and then again, and then again. And then by the time I'm back to this, suddenly I feel a little bit better.
Right. I love
Um,
that. I love that piece of it. Like you always have it with you, right? It's
mhm.
always here. And same with the breath. It's like those two tools. I was thinking about that for myself this morning. So I love you, and I love that. And I'm sorry to like cut you off there. Please.
No, no, please. I appreciate it. And I think the the thing about technique emotional regulation techniques is that they always have to be accessible, and they always have to be things
Mm,
that we can remember and that we want to do in the moment.
mm,
So if your second grader, for example, at home is not wanting to do the deep breaths, and that's not going to work for them, and it's just going to make them feel more triggered because they don't
mhm.
have that body control yet, then that's not what's going to work for them. Then they
Right.
need something that's more like a fidget, a worry stone, something they can rub in their hand. They're going to need to do something active, like heavyweight exercises, or literally like just walking, walking, walking until
Hmm.
they're able to sit down again and focus on the test. It is interesting how different things work for different people, and we have to give ourselves the opportunity to try all those things when we're calm so that we
Yeah.
can figure
Ah,
out if
there
they
we
work for us.
go. That's how you kind of test it with a kid to know whether your kid or your student is going to be able to use this under a stressful situation, introduce them while they're regulated, you know.
Yes, yes, always
Awesome.
when you're regulated, and then always it has to feel good, has to be something that you're going to want to access later.
That really stood out to me. Like it's something that they're gonna want to do, and it might be that that kid is more of like a mover, right? They might want to
Hmm.
move it out, and that's more something they're gonna enjoy, or the breaths, and they really can connect with that and want to do it. That's like seems like such a pivotal piece in there. Thank
Yeah,
you for
it's
dropping that
it's
in.
neat. It's neat. Yeah. And we really do have to think through what our kid in particular is going to want to do.
Hmm.
Um, because if I have a kid at home and I know my kid is a mover, then it's almost not worth it to try those ones where you're having to sit really still.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there like as like a social worker, I'd imagine it might come up in your role in that space, like where how can you without like forcing something because I love breath I love the breath work and using that as a tool for me. And I know how powerful it can be. A kid might not want to do it. We're like, what I'm hearing from you is like, we're not here to force them to do any of that. Like if that's not for them, that's not for them. How would you approach, like, if a kid's kind of, I don't want to say stubborn, but they're really resistant to any sort of help? Um, how would you kind of approach a kid like that?
I think for that kind of student, that intrinsic motivation is the kicker here. And SEL
Mhm.
is all about that too. Really cool part about it is that it's all about you have to want to do better in life and not, hey, your teachers are gonna make sure that you know these math facts, but instead it's how are you gonna be in control of this situation?
Mm.
So I kind of have to almost market things to kids sometimes.
Hmm.
I have to say, have you thought about how this is going to impact your friends? And sometimes it's as simple as like recess. Um, Things can get really heated, especially
Hmm.
with the group games. So if there's a soccer game going on and man, these egos are at play, these kids are butting up against each other, and they don't want to take the deep breath to calm down.
Uh-huh.
That's fine. But then it needs to be a conversation of, well, do you think people are going to want to play with you if you're constantly
Mm.
calling them names or being a sore loser? Do you think that you're going to be invited to the soccer games at recess time after time? So whatever it is that's
Mhm.
valuable to that kid
Mm.
can be what motivates them in the future.
I love that. I'm so happy that we're here because I feel like these are truly like some super powerful gems. Like, okay, you have the tools, and like you said, the deep breath is something that like a lot of people know about. Many people might practice, many people won't, right? It might not be a fit for everybody, but that level deeper of what's their motivation? How can we motivate? How can they find motivation through these open-ended questions, to start accessing these skills and to want to participate in their emotional regulation.
Yeah, yeah. And that's to answer the other question that you mentioned too. Like that's the part that really excites me. Because
Mhm.
it is all about seeing kids take responsibility for their own learning. It's just not the
Mhm.
traditional academic learning that we always think about. Um,
Yes.
the personal experiences that I've seen are really cool. I mean, I see my own kids, when we parent them learn to not need us as much anymore. And as much as I
Mhm.
want to be needed, and that's my, mom piece coming through, of course I want my kids to rely on me. But what SEL does is it gives kids an opportunity and a way to advocate for themselves so that they can be resilient without
Mhm.
experiencing the hardship necessarily. So it's giving them those lessons and those skills without experiencing all of the trauma that might make some of us adults, some of us millennials in particular, like I
Mhm.
feel like I see that online all the time, about all of our emotional turmoil and
Yeah.
we've learned all these lessons. um, but the cool part is now we can teach our children what those lessons are without them having to experience all that pain, and they can make good
Hmm.
choices for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it ties directly into like how the hand's always there, the breath's always there. Like your parent isn't always going to be there. Your teacher isn't always going to be there to help you navigate this conflict at recess or with a friend group at a sleepover, whatever it is. Like,
Mhm.
so empowering them in that way with their something that's with them forever, their mind, their heart, their body,
Mhm.
it's a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
Kind
And
of
I use it too.
oh,
Like
100%.
I also need it, whether I'm prepping for, a job interview or like a first date or whatever it might be. As an adult, we use the same things. We also need self-regulation skills for those two instances and more. When
Yeah.
I'm in the workplace and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that very much, I also need to use my group work skills, my empathy skills, my
Hmm.
compromising skills, because no one's above it. We're all still just learning.
So I want to dive into two things that you just brought up. You started to name like the group skills, the empathy skills. Like, what are those like pillars, or like main areas, and how as parents can we kind of model those things?
Yeah, so the Castle 5 is a really good resource for parents. And I think the Castle website in general, and it's CASEL.
Mm-hmm.
Those are generally the five competencies that we look for.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one would be self-awareness and then self-management. And then we would do social awareness and relationship skills. So if you want to think of them in like pairs like that,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of go in a
That
similar
takes some
category.
skill right there.
I don't know what I just like gotta visualize it. And then the last one being responsible decision making. So most of the skills that we talk about fall into one of those five categories. And it depends on a child's developmental stage, what we're looking for in each one of those categories. And that is the really tricky part because I think we all want our kids to be really perfect there. We all want our
Mhm.
kids to have the most empathy and to succeed and make really good decisions, but they're still learning, so they're not going to yet.
Right.
So for learning about things like that, I would recommend books or websites. There's a lot of them that are really great at showing the developmental stages and what they kids should be able to do at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really great way for parents to kind of take that first little, that toe in the water into the cell world
Mm-hmm.
because it helps us know what the kid is capable of and what we can then expect and then how we can push that. So
Right.
books like Yardsticks or websites like the Child Mind Institute, really
Mm.
great resources so we can know, okay, I have a, 7-year-old at home, so what should he be able to accomplish
Right.
in these five categories?
Right. And then we can kind of help them in the areas that they're, might be a little behind and know, I really identify that, have some awareness of that child where they could use the support. Really appreciate you throwing out those resources as well. I'm familiar with Castle. I'm familiar with Child Mind Institute, but not Yardstick. So excited to check out that for myself as well. Um,
Go for it.
for,
Yeah, it's good.
So okay, that definitely hit on the parent piece, and the core competency piece. So let me see where else. Okay, so like we've hit on like the academic side, the emotional side. What are some like practical strategies that parents can use in specifically a situation around like a frustrated or angry kid in a moment?
Yeah, I always have to remind myself of this as well because I have a toddler at home and she's 2. So we're having a lot of big feelings, and sometimes I have to walk myself through the emotions of that situation too. So I think
Mhm.
the best thing, and I say this, and I'm also still working on it myself, the
Mhm.
best thing that parents can do for a frustrated moment at home is to model the skills for their kids. If
Mhm.
we're not in it with them, then these kids are learning that they have a different expectation than their parent does.
Mhm.
That parent doesn't have to calm down, but they do. And I worry that that would then make the kid resentful over time.
Mhm.
So I think a really great formula to kind of teach our kids this self-regulation is to label it ourselves. So we have to start with, there's a back and forth. Let's say dinner time is kind of frustrating for my kiddo right now. So sometimes it's, no, I don't want to eat this.
Mhm.
Sometimes I have to step back and I have to say, okay, I'm frustrated right now. And
Mhm.
then I have to do my own technique to show her that I can do that. So I have to say, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go in my room for 5 minutes. I'm going to sit you down here. This is what I'm going to do. Or I'm going to listen to a song to help cheer me up because music is really powerful for me. I'm going to
Mhm.
announce that out loud.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to come back to the situation and rejoin it once I'm regulated. Because if I'm not
Mhm.
regulated, I can't work through those emotions with my kid.
Mhm.
If I can't regulate myself, how am I going to be the one who's like, calm down,
Right.
like
Right. Right.
take a deep breath,
Yeah.
that's not going to work.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think that we have to validate our children in modeling it ourselves. Like, I
Mhm.
hear that you're frustrated. I am also frustrated. This is what I'm going to do. We don't force them to do a technique
Hmm.
themselves, but I think over time they'll learn, okay, this is the formula. This is how it
Right.
goes. I know what to expect from my parent. And that's
Hmm.
one less thing to be worried about in this moment.
Yeah.
So it's that fight over the dinner table. Okay, I know you feel upset that we can't have pizza for dinner. I'm feeling frustrated because I worked really hard on this meal and I feel like that's
Hmm.
not being appreciated. We can't have pizza for dinner. I'm going to hold that boundary.
Hmm.
I'm going to help myself get not frustrated or at least less frustrated. And then
Hmm.
it's, then we can work this out together.
Yeah, and I heard in your the techniques or tools that you use, the music piece, that sounds like something you want to do, and like I modeling that for your kid is just super special. So I know you said you're like still working on it, Micah. Like that is a powerful tool that I think is having such a ripple on the world, and I see a lot more parents and people being mindful of like how they're going about this. So thank you for that formula. Thank you for
Mhm.
doing that with your kid, and helping to potentially break cycles. I don't know, like, but just set them up for success. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I'm still
and
working on it too. I mean, I'm not perfect. I apologize to my kids. I say, oh,
mhm.
mom messed up there. I gotta
Yeah.
own that. But the part about it that I really appreciate is that when I apologize, it gives the kids the opportunity then to learn too. And they're like, okay, no one's perfect here,
Yeah.
but we all struggle. And I know it's going
Hmm.
to be okay because my parent is right there with me.
Yeah. And I love too that like you're doing this with a 2-year-old. They might not fully understand what's going on. They might not like be like, oh, they're not going to get that that's the formula that mom's using
Hmm.
right now. But I believe in that. My sisters do such a great job of just having conversations with their young ones and stuff. And I am not a parent yet. So I'm like in preparation through some of these conversations as well. But
Hmm.
just seeing like, that as early as they come out, we're starting to model these behaviors and they're soaking it all up in one way or the other. So
Hmm.
really special. I think the last question that I have for you today is kind of along those same lines of like anger, frustration, but more in a conflict resolution sense. Like kids are getting frustrated with one another at recess or at home, siblings, that sort of thing. Like I'm sure it's probably in a similar vein, like being able to model it, but how would you help to guide a set of kids or a group of kids through some conflict resolution?
That's a great question, and I am very passionate about restorative conversations.
Mm,
And if we look up more online, there's a lot more resources than what I can speak to now. But restorative conversations are all about hearing both sides. And so
mhm,
it's that same concept of like, okay, if I'm frustrated and my kid is frustrated, we both need to be heard.
mhm,
But with siblings or with, yeah, kids on the playground at recess or, they're in gym class, playing a basketball game, whatever it might be, we both need to be heard. So
mhm.
what I do here in my district is we use a peace path a lot. And I can send you this too, so you
Yes,
can,
please. We'll share it with the blog. And yes.
yes, absolutely. But essentially what it is facing each other and taking turns talking.
Mm,
And so on here, it's a lot of, I feel blank when blank.
mhm,
And you have to fill those in. So even if it's one kid is generally, the perpetrator here, if one kid is okay, pushing that envelope a little bit too much, getting a little too intense in the game or what have you, the other kid also shares. So I feel really scared when
mhm,
you are calling us all losers, while we're playing
mhm,
this game. And
mhm.
it gives the opportunity for the person who kind of did the wrong to also share. So
Yeah.
I feel a lot of pressure to be good at this game.
Mhm,
Um, and then the goal is to walk away with a better understanding of both sides.
mhm,
And both people have to take away something that they're going to do differently.
mm,
So in that case, maybe the kid who's calling names is going to say, "Okay, I need to take a break. I'm not going to call names anymore." But the kid who's you know, receiving it could also say, I'm going to give you a little bit more understanding. I
Mhm.
know that this is hard for you when you're
Mhm.
not doing well in this game. I know that you really want to achieve. So I'm going to make sure I compliment you when you do have a really great like move or score a great goal or something
Yeah.
like that.
I love that. And it seems to me that it's hitting on like so many areas of those like Castle Five, like the
Hmm.
self-awareness, the relationships, the communication piece, I'm sure falls in somewhere in those
Hmm.
five, like beautiful. And it actually came up in something else you were sharing around like rupture and repair, kind of in that, mother-daughter dinner
Hmm.
situation, like the restorative conversations afterwards. Like it's okay if we're going to mess up as parents, as teachers, but being able to restore and repair through conversation, connecting with you from your heart, like really, really meaning it, will definitely be a way through. Um,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
it's nice that both people have to take ownership in this
Hmm.
scenario. And then
Hmm.
with social emotional learning in general, nobody is free from that. We all have to take responsibility. And that's the
Yes.
hard part, but also the part that really sets us up for success.
Hmm. Beautiful. Micah, thank you so much for sharing. I wish like we could hear like the people from the podcast like applauding you just like for truly for taking the time and like just sharing everything that you did. Like I learned a ton today, which would like is a selfish reason I'm doing the podcast to like continue to learn and grow. But to share with all the people that we'll be able to touch, even if it's just a few, is really special. So thank you for your time in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this kind of thing, so it's really my pleasure, and it's
Hmm.
really great that people are wanting to learn more about this. SEL is awesome, so everybody should learn more as much as they can.
Yes, and I know I like connected with you on LinkedIn, so you can find Micah on LinkedIn if you want to connect in that sense. Is there anywhere else people can reach out if they have any questions or any resources that you might have to share?
Yeah, I'm on TikTok. I've been making silly videos on there. You can link me there, or LinkedIn is just great too. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, and we're definitely going to be sharing that peace path or path to peace
Peace
path.
Path.
There we
You
go.
got
We're going to
it.
be sharing that. We're going to be sharing the
Yeah.
Castle and Child Mind Institute yardstick, all those resources in our blog article. So check that out. Share it with a friend. Micah, once again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you.